make me carry a mic.
Yeah, it's recording and I check the training.
You got any duct tape, man? So I can duct tape this thing on here? How am I supposed to? Now I can't even carry my Diet Coke, my Pointer, and drink my Poppins at the same time. You're killing me, man. You know that's not going to happen. Okay, so let's move on. So classification. So we know we have data. Now we get into the conversation of classifying that data. And this is where ultimate fail happens for most organizations. Because remember, who are the people that are going to be classifying the data that you have? Whose responsibility is that? It is the people doing the work. It is your employees. It's not management classifying that data. It's your people that have to go, hey, this is confidential data or this is not confidential data, because they're the ones handling that. So we get into the classification, and what you're going to see up here is some slides that actually show some forms. I worked for a Fortune 500 a number of years ago, so these slides kind of are from that environment there where we generated a process. I don't know if you've heard of that before, a process. A process so your employees can actually classify their data. So they can come in and make a determination, is this data confidential, public, or fall in the category of secret? Because if your employees do not understand the classification of the data, what do you think they're going to do with it? They're going to treat it all the same. And when they treat it all the same, people like me are going to take it all from them. Because they're going to handle secret data just like they handle public information. And that's what leads to companies like, this has happened several times, universities and colleges and stuff end up publishing all of their student information online, including social security numbers, like databases and stuff like that. That's happened over and over and over and over. So why does that happen? Because they don't understand classification of data. Data is data to them. It's all the same, and they treat it the same. And that's how easily this stuff gets put in the wrong places. Another thing to consider while I'm doing this presentation is I really don't like quiet. You guys are way too quiet. So I like interaction. So, to keep this thing from being overly boring, ask questions during the middle of it. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Raise your hand. Tell me I'm full of crap. Yeah, well, there you go. Perfect. So let's make this an interaction. Let's make this fun and entertaining. Let's make this a chance to learn. Bring some new ideas and thoughts to the subject. Because I'm not the ultimate expert. I mean, you guys should be the ultimate experts. You're the ones protecting that data out there. So share with me maybe methods or ways to prevent people like me from taking your data as we work through this. So share your thoughts and ideas with me. So here's another couple data classification policy and procedure structures. Purpose of policies. We want to define policies. Why we want to define those policies? Obviously, so your employees can better go about classifying your data and handling it properly. Purpose of the processes, and we got a couple examples here. Create a standard for classifying and handling data within the organization. So that's what management's job is. Create these guidelines, processes, and purposes. Filter that information down to all the workers in the organization and train them properly. And then they can come in and they can actually classify the data. So when I was working at a Fortune 500 company, we had a big issue with this. Employees treated everything the same. I remember sitting in a meeting with HR, and I found out that HR was sending out all their employee information, social security numbers, banking transaction information, everything in an email to the bank organization that was handling like the 401k. Just a standard email, non-encrypted, nothing like that. So what happens is we're in a meeting with them. I'm like, dear God, what are you doing? You can't do that. They go, okay, we'll start transferring it with FTP then. No understanding of how to protect the data, how to classify the data, or the fact that they were even doing anything wrong. And this needs to be defined with the process and procedures by your management. And then teach your employees how to move forward from there. So get into classification examples. This ought to be fun. So how do you classify data? How do you guys classify data? Do you do it? I assume you have some method. Tell me. Somebody tell me. How do you have a process for classifying data in your organization? Just quick 10 words, how do you do it? Is there a general way? Do you have processes, procedures? Or is it some dictation by management? So you got process and procedures. So how many people here work for state or federal government? Okay, do you have process and procedures around classification of data? Okay, I would expect you would. So medical organizations, I assume you have no process. Based on my experience, you have no process and procedures. Am I correct? It's all the same? Yeah, that's what I figured. That's probably the same. So looking at public data, what would you consider public data? You know, a final version of an annual report. That's pretty simple. Maybe stuff, press releases that have already been released to the public. That's pretty straightforward too. Public information sources outside of this organization, marketing brochures. These are types of things that fall into public. So you really don't need to worry about these. But do your employees know that and the difference between that and PII information? Historically, I found out that's not the case. And again, I go back to medical. Medical places have a tendency to have absolutely no clue. They make you sign. The interesting thing is they make you sign that piece of paper saying that they're going to protect your data and they're going to meet all these guidelines. But I've yet to actually run into a place that did more than just the paperwork. So don't take that personal. You know, that just happens to be an observation of actually doing assessments on probably 40 different insurance companies and probably 30 to 40 different medical institutions, including hospitals. And they all seem to be the same. So moving from there into confidential data. Pre-announce acquisitions and divestiture information. Well, this can fall into a couple different categories. Considers what stage you are in the process. A lot of times divestitures and acquisitions will actually fall into the secret category, especially if you're a public traded company. That's going to affect the value of your stock. That's usually going to be held secret. It's kind of one of those things, I don't know if you ever worked for that company and you get up that one morning and you turn on the news and you just find out your company's been acquired by someone else. That was the secret part. Okay. There may have been a confidential somewhere in there, but that confidentiality would have gone to certain people in the company, and typically us that do the work in the company. We only find out when we see it on the morning business news. Overall marketing, product, finance, strategies, personal related information within the organization, employee benefit information, company planning procedures, customers, partnerships. So I was doing an assessment on an organization, and they had a Google appliance. Everyone familiar with like a Google appliance? They're kind of cool, but they can really be misconfigured really bad. So I was on one, and they had a Google appliance, and we were searching for stuff, and I'm like, I wonder if I search for secret information. So I searched for secret information, and sure enough, a bunch of items came up. Now remember, I'm just a standard nobody on the internet, and they were exposing this. I couldn't get to the data, but they had failed to turn off the caching function. So I was actually able to pull up the caching. And what it was listed under secret was internal information they had gained on competitors. And it was just being published on the internet. Yeah, so I told them about that, and yeah, they kind of crapped their pants like really quick as they spazzed to get that offline, because it was really incriminating, like really bad. Because the stuff they had in there was like, how'd you get this information? This is probably right on the edge of, I don't know, if ethics there at a minimum. So they removed that offline. So how many people here in your organization have confidential data? I expect everyone. Do you know what that confidential data is? So most of you work in security, right? IT. So if I showed you data within your organization, you'd probably say, yeah, that's confidential, not confidential. So from an IT perspective, how do you get the people underneath you to handle that, to understand the things that you're handling? Because remember, I'll be straight up with you. IT's not responsible for classifying data. It's not your job. It's the people that own the data and work with the data's job. You can't do that. You may look at it and go, yeah, that probably is confidential or not confidential. But you're really not in a position to make that business decision for the organization, and it is a business decision. I worked for a Fortune 500 company. We were in the same boat. How do we get people, us as IT or security, how do we get people thinking about classification of data? Now, we didn't have full buy-in from upper management. We initially did, but that kind of waned after a couple acquisitions and mergers, and they got their minds buried in making more money somewhere else. How do we handle getting people to do this? Well, it turned out as IT and security, we control the keys of the kingdom. That means if you wanted to move data from point A to point B, typically it would require some kind of changes within firewalls, within systems that we owned. So we created a guideline. Now, we couldn't get it officially approved by upper management, but what we did was we talked management into giving me a website, an intranet website, where I could actually talk about security subjects. That's all we said. We just want to publish security subjects so we could share with the employees to get them thinking about it. So we wrote an entire process, procedure around data classification. And we published it on our site as an educational standpoint. And then the next time someone made a request to have something done within the organization, I pointed them to that procedure and I said, classify the data for me. Now remember, we had no authority. We didn't have approval from upper management. But we eventually, after a period of time, it convinced everyone in the entire corporation that this was a legitimate document approved by management. And we got everyone to start going through that process and going, hey, yes, if it doesn't contain this, yes, it's confidential. Does it not contain this? So after about 18 months, before anyone would even come to security and IT and make a request, they were filling out this bogus form I created and classifying all the data and giving us the detail on how they were going to handle it. So what we ended up doing was educating them using this process, even though we didn't have buy-in from upper management. And it made it easier for us to go, okay, now that this data is classified, so to some level, now we know how IT, security, to have it properly handled within the organization. Does that make sense? And I know most of you probably have a security website on your internet where you put up little training things and ideas of the day and stuff. Do you? How many people do? So yeah, okay, not very many. So it's an idea, it's something to think about. So then we get into secret data. This can be contracts, acquisitions, divestitures, which should have been moved over here, indicating operation trends or directions, marketing strategies, forecast assumptions, things that are part of the public traded information. It may contain key items within the organization, very specifically defined things. An example, I was doing a banking organization, a large banking infrastructure. And what I actually found out was that, no, they did not have a breakdown in their organization of public, confidential, secret, that type of thing. So they weren't necessarily handling everything correctly. This organization often transferred large sums of money, literally millions up to hundreds of millions of dollars. They were handling billions and billions of dollars every year. Well, actually, it would have been really nice to actually do something with what I found. But what I found in the system, I was able to gain access to the system, some standard attacks and break-ins and stuff like that, you know, gain a foothold, move lateral, escalate your rights within the organization. And I eventually got to the point where I landed in some interesting folders that were associated with the business organization. What I actually found was all the signature cards for all the bank transactions that they used to do large sum transactions. So it was full signature cards, detailed signatures, everything to do those $1 million transfers. The funny thing is I found those, and I didn't do anything with them. And that same day, the guy come running into my office, or into the room I was testing. He goes, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, what do you mean, what am I doing? Did you just try to transfer $1 million from this bank account to this bank account? And I'm like, I wish I had, but no, I did not. And if I had, I would have got away with it because I had the proper signature cards. The person who tried to do it did not have that information. But if they had, they may not have caught it until those transactions had gone through the motions. Inside this entire folder where I found these pay cards, I also found their documented process for validation of those transactions. Because you can't do just, hey, you don't write a check for $1 million. It just doesn't happen. There's a number of steps that go into that process. And we found detailed explanation of how those processes are done and how each step's validated, along with the appropriate signatures, the people that are called, the phone numbers, everything that's done to go through a validation process, the proper paperwork that's done. And since we had all that information, had all the right signatures, had all the right phone numbers, it would have been possible to stage up an entire $1 million financial transaction. And we know that happens. I mean, it's happened over the years a number of times. Organizations have lost large sums of money. I cannot remember the name of the company, but here, about a year or two ago, a company ended up having that happen to them. Ended up having like $1 million transferred. And what happened was somebody also contacted the people and started yelling at them, I need this done and I need it done now. And the person got frustrated and they bypassed those steps, validation steps, and transferred the money before it was figured out it was too late, and they lost a large sum of money. So here's a chart that we actually built for data classifications and structures, like employee information. We broke it down to confidentiality, integrity, availability, and we laid this out within our organization to try to build that structure. And this is just a small sample that, if anyone's interested in this, I probably still have this entire documentation stripped of any corporate type information. If you want to send me an email or something sometime, I'd be glad to share that with you. It's kind of an interesting, the entire form and structure is kind of interesting. It's a good place to start if you want to get into managing your data within your organization. So where is your data? Now this is the fun part. Okay, we've gone through the boring part now. At least I think it's boring, since I am offensive. Where is your data? So where do you think you put your data? I mean, these are some of the general places where you're going to put your data. You know, encrypted data storage, yeah, encrypted databases. Those are probably good places, right? I would think so. Password protected FTP server, oh, that's a real winner, always, right? I got a good story around that. They were surprised. Anonymous FTP, those are even better. That's always the best. Password protected Windows shares. Yeah, that's good. But remember, if anyone gains a foothold in your internal network, unless you get some real good incident detection and incident response solutions, they're going to be DA and own everything you have, probably within, you know, half a day at most. Baseband. Yeah, I mean, this is just a small example. Anonymous Windows shares. Yeah, people still do that. It's totally insane, but I encounter these quite often. NFS shares, that seems to be a real common one. Mail. Everyone sends confidential data through mail, correct? Right? Everybody? Yeah, your passwords, you know, backups of the database. Okay, yeah, everyone does that. Various random USB storage devices. Even that one you found walking into the office in the parking lot, right? So, okay. So, if you don't know where your data is, maybe it's already owned by the Russian mob, and you always have the ultimate solution. You can probably buy it back from them. You laugh. So everyone's seen that malware that actually will lock your drive and encrypt it. You got to pay. Yeah. So I got a call. Here. Sitting watching TV with my wife, my phone rings. I'm like, hey, this is my old boss from years ago. Get on the phone. I'm like, hey, Sam, what's up? He's like, hey, I need you to talk to my IT guy. We got a problem. Get on the phone and you're like, yeah, one of their primary servers has been locked down. So I take them through some incident response stuff and at least get them to the point where they know how it came on board and they can stop it so it doesn't lock down everything. But they'd already gone through the motions to actually buy Bitcoins to pay this guy off to get this stuff. I'm like, wait, do you have backup? The last thing you want to do is pay these people money, especially if they have a foothold. They're just going to do it again and again and again, you know? And I never did get the final answer on that, so I left that up to them. I'm like, give me Bitcoins. I'll come down here and fix it for you. I just format the thing and restore the backup. Reinstall. When was your last backup? So yeah, there's some crazy things going on out there, and you know, maybe it's not the Russian mob, maybe it's someone else, right? Okay. So real world issues. What kind of issues do we encounter? And we already mentioned FTP. This is the most key, critical thing that I can tell you about every organization in here. If you have anonymous FTPs on your network, your employees will be using them to store and transfer data, period. Every company I go into and I scan for FTP, I find data there. So what kind of data? Well, you know, an example is one organization, this kind of ties into the secure FTP or the password FTP. So one organization, I scan their network. I'm like on the network for their 15 minutes. And I'm like, I fire up a couple scans. I look for the most common things. This is a good one. FTP, anonymous FTP. Always find cool stuff in anonymous FTP. So I hit this one and I'm like, I log into it and here's this file. So I open this file up and it contains 24,000 username, address, social security number. I'm like, cool. So I contacted the guy and the manager there because this is some critical stuff. I'm looking at the date stamp on it and it's that day. And there's several other backups in there. Turns out that this was a large moving business, trucking business, whatever. They move data. But they don't own their own trucks. So they outsource the trucks to independent drivers. The independent drivers have badges. And what they do is they have a badging system to get in and out of their locations. And they also have a PeopleSoft system they use for tracking, paying, and some other stuff. And also SAP system. So they all tie together. Turned out that they had set up a transfer system from the PeopleSoft to do a flat file transfer to an FTP server, which was picked up by the badging system every day. And there's like, well, how did you get access to that? We got like a 30-character password. Yes, you did have a 30-character password, but you forgot to turn anonymous off. So they literally had deployed this thing, set this massive long password, which we know is no good. It's FTP. It's clear text authentication. But they forgot to turn, because Windows default anonymous, they forgot to turn anonymous off. So even though they had this big, massive password to protect themselves, it didn't really matter. So we got all these social security numbers there. Email. This is probably one of the greatest entry points, especially from external, for gaining various attacks and information from an organization. One of the big things here is when we're doing external assessments, so how many people here have OWA? Do you have two-factor? Anyone have two-factor in their environment? Okay, two-factor. Well, it turns out with OWA, there's a problem with OWA that's a timing attack. I think there'll be a talk today around 3 o'clock. I think one of my friends, Nate Power, is going to be talking about that. There's a timing attack where you can actually identify valid users in the environment based on a time response from the system. So I send a valid username and I get a response back in so many seconds if the user exists. If the user doesn't exist, it actually takes a different amount of time. So we can actually map out all the users. And then, of course, we all know from also on two-factor, if your two-factor is not set at the right structure, we can make a call underneath that structure and do the same thing. Okay, and get those usernames. So you need to look at that. There can be some issues there. And what we typically do is we carry out a password brute force attack because we can throw against it U.S. Census Bureau data, which is about 19,000 names, with a statistical accuracy of about 25 to 35%. So if you have an employee, 1,000 employees, we can throw this attack against the system and identify 250 to 350 of your valid employee usernames within the email system, and then carry out password attacks against the environment. So everyone knows what the best password right now is, don't you? Yeah, the best password right now. No, it's like winter 6 or winter 16 now, or spring 2016. It's typically the seasons, because remember, you set complexity. So what do you require with complexity? You can require uppercase, lowercase, number, or special character. So what's everyone use? They use seasons, because what is the rotation every 90 days? So employee has to change their password every 90 days. So they're going to change it to a season. So it'll be summer, spring, winter, fall, followed by the year, with the first letter being an uppercase initial. This has a high success rate. I mean, really high. It's amazing. And we use this attack. It's funny, we use this attack against a bank, or not a bank, but a hospital. So we came into the hospital and we were doing a PCI pen test. I kind of hate those. They're kind of screwy, but a PCI pen test for a hospital on their online stuff. So we throw this against them and we come back with, hey, we got an account. This was midsummer last year, so it was summer 15 was the password. Easy enough. We gained access. We went in there, we gathered all kinds of stuff, and we basically, I mean, literally tons of stuff. We used that to get other systems and stuff like that. Well, the customer actually was like totally pissed. Where do you get off doing this? This isn't PCI. The fact that we broke in with some sorry-ass password on your network that you shouldn't be using, and basically what they did was they came back and they ordered us to remove, out of the 10 systems, we broke into like half of them with this password. They made us remove those half out of the scope and then redo the report. Their philosophy was, this meets PCI requirements because that requires complexity. Change every 90 days, upper, lower case, special character. Since that was the case, it had no business doing in the report. So, but since he stripped all the systems we broke in out of the thing, he got a report. And of course, we made some general notes. Well, they threatened to never do business with us again, which I'm totally fine with, because that's not security, and I don't want my name tied to anything like that. And actually, the person doing the assessments name didn't end up on the report because he refused to put his name on the report. So it was a report with blank names. So no one actually did the assessment. Okay. So that's kind of interesting. But yet we're able to gain a foothold in there, and there's all kinds of cool stuff you can get. We rarely see two-factor. We had a few people mention two-factor. Inherently, we find problems with two-factor too. Not all of them are created equal. Sometimes we can gain various footholds through two-factor. An example was like, not the vulnerability, but Juniper. Well, Juniper had that vulnerability just recently. But besides the known vulnerabilities, Juniper, as an example, often has the ability to set up multiple two-factor authentication windows for like SSL and stuff like that. So you can actually cycle through those. We found this on most occasions. When I log on, hit their site, and it challenges me for two-factor, I can't remember the name of the URL for their SSL, but there's a number sequence there you can put in there, and you can walk through it all the way up to 99, and you can check for possible 99 different configurations that could be put on the system. Inevitably, we always find one where two-factor's turned off. They put that there. Why? Because, hey, you know, Joe out on the street lost his RSA token or whatever. He can't get in. How do we get him in? Well, we point him to this new URL. No one's going to find that URL. Of course not. It's secret. We didn't tell anyone about it. And then we can use to get a foothold that way. So you see there's a number of different ways to bypass and attack these different things. And I love email because you can go into someone's email box and ask certain questions like, Social Security number, SSN. You'd be amazed what comes back, especially if you break into somebody who happens to be HR. Now, remember, this is internal email. You're putting it on the internet. Let's not forget about that. Everyone forgets about that. They think, this is internal email. We can exchange email internally. Well, can you? You know? Remember, all that data exists there, and if you expose it to the internet, that means someone has a web interface. You expose it to the entire internet. If someone gains a foothold, they gain a foothold in your entire internal email system. So that doesn't mean go out there and turn off your email system. Just the opposite. Start thinking about data classification and what you're moving through email. You know, or do you need to exchange a file in email that contains confidential information? Then you may want to set up some kind of encryption, file encryption, encrypt those files to do that exchange, even internally. Don't leave that data sitting there because it's easy to get. I did an assessment one time. I wanted to get a foothold in the company, so I gained several accounts. One of the accounts I tried to get into their actual VPN, their SSL VPN. I was trying to get a foothold into that. And, but I couldn't because they actually had keys. Everybody had a key assigned to them. So I broke into the person's email because that's hard to set up with two-factor, and I just searched for the key. I found his key, downloaded and installed it on my system, and now I was able to get into his system. Because how do we deliver those things? Send them through email, right? There you go. Exactly. You don't want to get rid of it. You may need it. The Russians may need it. The Chinese may need it. And I know surely I will need it someday. So, development environments. This is a really bad one. So how many organizations here have development environments? Okay. Typically the security on those are lowered. We know that's the case. The killer is we end up using real world data. It's not scrub data. This is over and over and over. And I've seen this in hospitals. They're developing a new system or doing development, and they'll actually pull over the live database of literally all of their patients. I did a hospital like that one time, and they had a dev machine, and they had all the Oracle default passwords still enabled on it. And they'd pulled over the actual production system. And the cool thing is they'd done it that week for me. Apparently they knew I was coming. I needed access to all their patient data, so they moved it over there. Logged in with default passwords, dumped patient data for like 100,000 patients. And that's literally everything. This even contained credit card information for paying stuff, social security numbers, medical, everything about medicine, literally everything was available there. Database storage. This is good. We want to store stuff in a database, positive. We want to encrypt that data. So you guys that have databases, do you encrypt the data? All of the current database models make encryption really easy. Pretty easy. Well, we were doing an organization a couple years ago, and this happened to be I want to say a city. It was a big city, one of the biggest cities in the country. And we were doing part of their public health program systems. And we gained access to their databases. And they were all encrypted. Literally everything was encrypted. The only thing that saved me, didn't save them now, saved me, was the fact that they stored all the encryption keys in the same folder as the database. So you laugh. You need to go check. You will be surprised because remember, sometimes they need that data. They need those keys to do stuff, to do maintenance, to do various things on the system. Where's the easiest place to keep them? Where you're doing the work. So before you laugh, I would go check. You may find out that those keys are setting on that exact same server because the odds are very high that they are. I like that. Wheel passwords. I need to learn how to spell. Transit. We've already talked about some of this, but we all know the issues with FTP. There's eavesdropping there. You can easily pick up the authentication, which is an easy attack method, especially if someone's doing constant transactions like that, possibly to gather that data. But also, step back here a little bit. And I have NFS here. I hadn't mentioned NFS. Just recently, I was doing an assessment, and NFS is very much like anonymous FTP. Most companies don't realize that it's really there, at least from security standpoint. It's like one of those things, unless you actually know what to look for or query for, you don't really know that there's an NFS mount set up with everyone access. And I often see these set up really bad. That means they'll put it on the root of the system and make the entire system available. Seen that. I was on one just recently for a large enterprise organization where it turns out that NFS was enabled on their PeopleSoft system. Okay? but it was only enabled to a certain folder. So I went into the PeopleSoft, or into the NFS on the PeopleSoft system, and I found scripts. Us as IT people, we like scripts. It makes our lives easier. So they'd set up some FTPs to automatically do transfers of the backup of the PeopleSystems database, and they had the password in there. So not only did I get access to backups of the PeopleSoft system, now I got the passwords that they were using to authenticate with, and was able to use that to authenticate into all the PeopleSoft systems as not root level, but enough access, because it was a PeopleSoft account, to gain access to all the structure for the PeopleSoft system, which is all your guys' data, literally all of your guys' data. You know, you don't want, you want people like me finding that. You don't want the Russians finding that when they break in. So that one was kind of interesting. So any questions so far? I know I've been rambling for like 40 minutes. You guys getting anything useful out of this? Yep. Okay. I don't see anyone falling asleep yet, and no one's thrown anything at me, which is always a plus. This guy keeps wanting to help me out here. Okay, so let's get moving on here. Database storage, we covered that. Real world, obviously FTP, email, HTTP. This is one of the coolest sayings I've ever came across when I'm dealing with security. SSL is like using an armored truck to transport money between someone on a park bench and someone doing business from a cardboard box. Well, SSL, TLS, it's all the same. Your security between your park bench and your cardboard box may improve, but remember, we still have a problem with the park bench and the cardboard box. That's what I'm trying to make here, because this is where we always fail. I've actually had a customer one time, we were able to break in through their web interface. We were able to break in through the web, found some vulnerabilities, executed code, and take control of a machine over the internet. And they were like, well, how did you do that? We had SSL. Yes, and you made our entire attack very secure. Okay? Because remember, that's only going to help you in transit. If either end is flawed, your data is going to get compromised. So take that into consideration when you're actually thinking and doing transfer of data. So what is the answer? 42? Put it all on your printer, right? Okay. So what's the answer? I've sat here and talked about it. I've talked about it from a defensive standpoint, some general ideas. I wouldn't say defensive. What I've done is I pointed out the bad stuff, okay? And talked about some of the offensive type things, the way we were able to get data. And literally, I could probably talk all day of the number of places I've stolen data using these same common things. Anonymous FTP, poor passwords, poor storage of data, putting it in the wrong spot, getting access to database because the keys were sitting where the database was. Yes? It's part of it. It's always part of it. Education is a piece of the whole puzzle. But it starts with policy and procedure. And yeah, I'm an offensive in more ways than one, but I'm an offensive type person. So I'm always attacking. I'm always learning from the attacks. My goal is to teach people how to defend themselves because of the attacks that I do. But the big thing is developing these policies and procedures. Because right now, I assure you, most everyone in this room, employees are incapable of classifying data. They do not know that it's their responsibility. And before you can actually get into training and education, you actually have to have policies and procedures in place. You have to define what that means at this level before you take it to the employees. Now, like I said, you may not always be able to get these approved by upper management. Upper management rarely ever approves anything, but nothing says you have to. Like I mentioned, you can set up an internet website and you can publish these there and start referencing. Just start pretending they're the way it is. until somebody in management says it's not. Then you can actually say, well, why do you think it's not important for your employees to properly secure your data? They may have a good reason. I can't imagine what that would be, but that's one way to go about it. And then from there, you get into maybe training and education. You don't necessarily have to do formal. That means you don't have to go in, pull everyone into a classroom and go, this is confidential data. This is secret data. But anytime they need to move data, and if you have your network set up right, they can't freely just throw stuff onto the internet. And you also may have secure servers that they may get access to data or need to put data on various servers. So if someone comes along and says, hey, I need a system set up to do A, B, or C, the question is, what kind of data we're storing on that system? You tell me what the classification of that data is. That's the only way you, as IT and security, can properly secure the data. They have to tell you what that classification is. That is a learning process for them, because now you're challenging them to go back and think about what they're getting ready to do. The organization I worked at, we actually controlled the firewall. We had kind of a three-man thing. To get something changed in the firewall, you had to have a requester, an approver, and an implementer. And no one group or person was allowed to be all three of those or two of those. Security was typically the approver. It was usually me. Networking was the implementer, and anyone could be the requester. So anytime someone would come in and go, because they'd always, they'd set up their systems, they'd get ready and go, hey, let's shoot this stuff to the bank, and it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? There's a stupid firewall in our way. So they would go to networking and go, hey, open up all these ports. Networking would go, that's nice. You need to get approved by security. They'd come over to me. They'd go, open up all these ports. And I go, tell me why. What's the business purpose for each one of these? And what do they do? Well, the vendor said they need to open all these up. I'm like, well, then tell me why. Because the vendor said so. And usually what I would do, I was like, well, let me consider it, give it to me. I would contact the vendor, and I'm going, why is this necessary? Explain it to me. I would look up the documentation on whatever they're running, applications or whatever. Inevitably, I have found out that over 75% of the ports that are requested to be opened up do not need to be opened up to be functional. It's purely because the vendor has no clue how their own product works, let alone the person who needs to implement it within the company. So you need somebody to be able to take that time, which is what we would do, and then we'd step back and go, no, this is what we're going to do. We're not going to stop you. There's a business need for this. But what we're going to do is we're going to implement what needs to be implemented. We're going to follow a procedure. And now before we make this happen, we need a detailed breakdown of the classification of the data. And that way we can ensure the transactions that you're going to be carrying out, if it's confidential classified data, is properly encrypted over that channel. And it worked. Within a year, I never had to ask a question to anybody anymore. They would show up on my desk, request a approval, have a breakdown from the vendor why each port would work, and then also would give me detailed breakdown of the classification of and type of data that was going to be moved. Took 1 year. This was a Fortune 500 company that had like 20 or 30,000 employees spread across 24 countries. And we were able to pull that off in a year, just by not rubber stamping everything. Just by asking questions and challenging them to answer it. So we have any questions? Yes, sir.
What company is it and are they hired?
What
company is it and are they hired?
No and no. I have no idea. So, yes.
Identifying those areas, storing that data, we need to be able to
Oh, I agree. And we kind of we kind of touched on it right here. Where is my data? But here I talked at it from a negative standpoint, because these are the points that are typically being used. and they're either not being used correctly, like you point out, or they have no idea where the data is. And most of the time, it's like you said, they have no clue where the data is.
I think they organizations spend time and resources finding the data on the network. You got guys out there looking for the data in-house and identifying where that data is sitting.
Okay, I agree with you. We need to identify where the data's at, most definitely, and that's a key part of this entire puzzle. There are technical solutions for that. Remember, there is no silver bullet. But there are software programs out there, there are appliances out there that you can purchase that can help you identify that data in a lot of cases. You can scan your network, it'll have a foothold into everything in your network, and you're able to identify where your data's at. Now, I like those products. I think they're cool. They are not the solution to everything. I've lost count of the number of companies that have, DLPs, data link prevention systems. They are able to identify the data on their network, but then they never put any controls in place. Well, we know where it's at, but they've never changed the controls that exist on their network. Also, those data link prevention solutions will detect stuff outgoing. Every company I've been to that's had a DLP, one of the things they always wanted to know is, how well is our DLP working? And the way we try to do that is we try to actually escalate data out the network, try to get data off the network. And I have yet not to be able to do that. We've taken bogus Social Security, credit card numbers. Now, if you send it out through normal means, through the email system, and it's not encrypted, and it's in plain text, blah, 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 they'll detect it. But if I turn around and go, okay, I'm going to encrypt this up, I'm going to create a tunnel out over some arbitrary port that's non-standard, and move the data off your network, they never detect it. That seems to be the case. So we're looking at policies, processes, awareness, and training. And it includes the detail of what Tim had mentioned, where your data's at. So what we need to do is figure out where your data's at, what you're doing with it, the classification of that data, and how to protect that data. Start off with policies, processes, and then get into awareness training. Like I said, that doesn't have to be formal training. That could be what I'd mentioned and just making it a requirement for them to identify their data before you let them do anything with it. And of course, some training. Yes, sir. Yeah, unfortunately, if lawyers ever get a hold of these things, they're usually not usable, and that sounds like the case there. It's kind of a hard one. You know, sometimes it may come down to the security manager, ever who's in charge of security, to interpret that stuff and take that interpretation and share it with the entire company. Because like you said, I'm personally, I am not going to read a 30-page legal document to figure out what security policies are for a company. And neither is anyone in your company. They're just not going to do it. So sometimes raising awareness of this is not a usable document may be sufficient enough to actually generate maybe taking that document, breaking it down into smaller consumable pieces, and make that available through some other training processes. I've seen everything from a weekly email to a poster on a wall to, a website where we break those pieces down so that they're consumable, can be very effective. Does that make sense? Okay. Thank you very much.